Monday morning. The sunlight was too harsh to be called pleasant. The sky was so clear it felt cold, as if the entire town had just been scrubbed with bleach and rearranged according to the color palette of people who had never known loss. In the back seat of an old Honda Imani Carter sat silently, her eyes trailing the dusty window. Identical houses slid past grey-tiled roofs, lawns trimmed to regulation standards, SUVs parked at perfect right angles. Each home looked like it was competing to graduate from capitalism faster. 16 years old, black, a pair of eyes trained more to observe than to hope. She came from South Glen, a neighborhood the kids here only knew through documentaries or whispered warnings at pool parties. It's dangerous, don't go near. Someone got stabbed just for looking the wrong way. But that was where Imani grew up. Survival meant learning to stand up when pushed, knowing when to stay silent, and most importantly, understanding that gentleness was a luxury. Her mother drove without a word. They'd been like this for months. There was no arguing or scolding, just a hollow silence where every question locked itself in the throat. As the car turned into the circular drop-off in front of Meadow Ridge, the new school building, shiny white brickwork, navy flags fluttering in the wind, came into view. The banner overhead read, "Excellence through community," a beautiful motto. But Imani knew communities don't open their doors to just anyone, especially when you wear a face they don't recognize. She stared at the words longer than necessary. Her jaw tightened, her thin fingers gripped the cracked door handle. In the driver's seat, her mother adjusted the rearview mirror, touched up her lipstick, then muttered, barely audible, "You'll be fine." No hug, no eye contact. Just a few taps of her fingernails on the steering wheel like it was time to go grocery shopping. The door opened. Imani stepped out. No turning back, no words. And when the door closed behind her, Imani Carter, a 16-year-old black girl from a neighborhood no one wanted to name, stood before a gate that didn't welcome her. In front of her, groups of students walked by designer coats, wireless earbuds, laughing like they'd known each other since preschool. No one looked at her, but she could feel the avoidance in their eyes. The morning breeze carried a faint whiff of perfume. She tightened her backpack straps, lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance, but as a reminder that her spine was still intact, and she walked in. The glass door shut behind her, and every sound seemed to get pulled into another world, a world where footsteps followed an order, where bells didn't blare like alarms, but chimed like a calibrated reminder. The first thing Imani noticed was the smell, not the cheap bleach and metal mix of her old school, but a gentle lemon scent, subtle, pleasant, and perfectly artificial, as if the whole school had been air-freshened to suppress injustice. Wide hallways, ivory-painted walls, lockers in dual shades of glossy blue, unmarred by dents or graffiti. LED lights lined up evenly, granite floors so polished they mirrored. Everything here was designed to soothe, but not for her. Imani walked step by step, hearing her rubber soles tap the floor, while the other students glided like this place was stitched into their DNA. No one paused, but the lack of greetings, the averted glances, and the muffled laughter as she passed, those spoke louder than any words. Her first class was homeroom. A woman with bleached curls stood at the door. Ms. Thornton, her eyes wider than her smile. "Welcome, Imani. We've heard we have a strong student joining us." Her voice was syrupy, and the word strong was emphasized with a tone that made Imani hear the invisible exclamation mark, as if they hadn't welcomed a student but a case study. She didn't respond, just gave a nod and walked to the back of the room to the seat for the new kid, the outsider who didn't belong. She set down her backpack, opened her notebook, gripped her pen, eyes fixed on the page's blank space. But her ears picked up slow, unhidden whispers. South Glen. Ghetto. She's so quiet, though. She probably got expelled. Imani didn't turn around, didn't react, but inside her a radar had flipped on. She didn't need to hear every word, just volume, distance, and breathing patterns to know who was watching her. She was monitored all morning like a strange animal just released into the zoo. Every glance stopped short of blatant but lingered long enough to be felt. By lunchtime, things were clearer. She entered the cafeteria like someone crossing a battlefield without a map. The tables were full, groups of friends chatting like they'd eaten together since infancy. Imani spotted a free seat in the back and approached it, but a blonde girl in a cream hoodie dropped into it 2 steps ahead. No apology, just a short glance as if to ask, "Don't you know the rules?" Imani didn't argue. She quietly turned away and chose a lone chair near the emergency exit. Not because it was better, just because it wasn't taken. She ate in silence. No one approached, no one joined her. And then in that stillness, she saw them. Zachary Miller, Dylan Brooks, Chad Walker. They entered the cafeteria like they were marching in formation, confident without having to be loud, hair slicked, designer jackets, the walk of boys who had never been told no without an explanation. Zachary looked at her, not long, just enough to send a message without speaking. "I know exactly what you are," he smirked, tilted his head, and whispered something to Chad. Chad let out a soft whistle. Dylan chuckled. No one said a word aloud, but Imani heard the contempt. She didn't drop her gaze, didn't smile. She looked back calmly, unblinking. And when they turned away, she knew they hadn't started yet. But they would. Very soon. The next morning, the hallway was still spotless, as if it had just been mopped. The LED lights still glowed evenly, and the silence still carried the same tone, smooth, refined, but not real. Imani walked, as she always did, quietly on time, chin lifted just enough. But on the 6th step, past the main entrance, thud, a hard shoulder check. Dylan Brooks, no apology, no glance back, no pause. She stumbled briefly, then regained her footing. The hallway moved on like nothing had happened. The first period was chemistry. She answered a tough question about an oxidation-reduction equation. From behind her, Chad snorted and muttered, "Must have learned that in hood school." Dylan snickered. Zachary didn't say anything, but curled his lip into the kind of grin you wear when watching a hunt unfold. Imani didn't turn around. She held her pen and kept writing, but her right hand tapped the pen tip against the desk in a rhythm she used to drum before stepping into the boxing ring. 1, 2, 3. Not to fight, but to remember that she could. PE basketball. Imani wasn't great, but she knew how to hold her position. When running for the ball, Dylan charged like a rocket, slamming into her shoulder, hard enough to knock her back a few steps. "Watch it, Queen Latifah," he sneered. A few kids laughed. Imani didn't fall, didn't react. She just stood tall and looked Dylan straight in the eye. "That's not even clever," she said, voice low, steady, unshaken. Dylan blinked, thrown off for a beat. "What?" Imani shrugged and turned away. "You're not funny, just loud." No one said anything for a second. Then, "Ooh," Chad called out from the bench. Zachary smirked quietly, saying nothing, but his eyes flashed with interest, like a predator realizing the prey had teeth. After school, as Imani walked toward her locker, Zachary stepped beside her as if by coincidence. "You got a little mouth on you," he said, tone light, almost impressed. Imani didn't stop walking. "You got a lot of nothing coming out of yours." Zachary chuckled. "I see what this is. New girl trying to prove something." She shook her head, eyes still forward. I'm not trying. I'm not new. Just relocated. Zachary tilted his head. Bet it wasn't anywhere like this. This time, Imani looked straight at him. Her gaze was sharp as steel, not even close, and for a moment, he stepped back. His smile slipped slightly. Then Zachary laughed awkwardly, raising both hands like someone backing out of a playful bet. All right, tough girl, let's see how long that fire lasts. Imani didn't answer. But inside she knew her fire didn't need to rage to be dangerous. It just had to burn steadily enough to consume contempt. The next morning, she opened her locker and found it stuffed with torn flyers and ripped paper scraps. On the back of each one, scribbled in Sharpie, "Go back. You don't belong. No one wants you here." She didn't cry, didn't call anyone, just quietly gathered each piece, tucked them into her backpack, and shut the locker with a deliberate cold final click. She didn't tell a teacher, but someone had seen Principal Jerome Foster. That afternoon, Imani stood tucked against one of the large brick columns near the school gate, waiting for a delayed bus. The day's last sunlight pooled pale and stretched across the pavement like a faded painting. She wore her earbuds but played no music. Her eyes stared into the distance but searched for nothing in particular. Then a voice broke the quiet. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to cut the air gently. "You doing all right here?" Imani turned. A tall, slender black man in a charcoal suit stood there, not crowding, not looming, just present, like he had been there all along and had chosen just the right moment to speak. Principal Jerome Foster. He didn't ask her name, didn't introduce himself, didn't smile with that grown-up face that says, "Trust me." He just looked at her. And his eyes weren't probing. We weren't pitying. They held stories yet untold. Imani nodded. "I'm good." He didn't walk away. "You sure you're not invisible?" She raised an eyebrow. "I never said I was." Foster nodded slightly, part agreement, part recognition of a familiar defense. "No, you didn't, but I've seen that look before." Imani crossed her arms. "What look?" Principal Foster leaned back, resting his elbow against the column, eyes steady. "The one that says, 'I know exactly how far I can be pushed,' before someone learns they picked the wrong one." Imani didn't laugh, but her lips softened ever so slightly, a smile not made of sound, just a quiet acknowledgement. He continued, voice lower now. "If anything crosses the line and you want it documented, come to me. I'll handle it the right way." She tilted her head, not smiling, but her eyes sharper. "What's the right way?" Foster exhaled, like pressing a silent piano key. "The way they don't expect." The bus pulled up. Imani stepped aboard without another word. But before the doors closed, she glanced down and saw Foster still standing there, his gaze steady. Not surveilling, just confirming. That night when Imani set down her backpack in her room, the crumpled papers spilled out from the bottom. She didn't turn on the light, she just sat there, lit only by the yellow hallway glow outside her bedroom door. The scraps marked with things like "Ghetto trash, go home." Not one of us spread across the floor like fragments of a silent explosion. She picked up a marker. Didn't cross anything out. Didn't correct the words. She numbered each piece, logged the date, logged the time. Imani Carter was no longer the new girl. She had started collecting the truth. And from that moment, an invisible war began, not with fists or power, but with the cold, undeniable language that outlasts every excuse, evidence. The second week passed, as if no one remembered when Imani Carter arrived. No one called her name, no one deliberately avoided her. But every glance was calculated to determine how long until the girl would break. She didn't. And that unsettled them. That day's weather was gloomy light trickling sluggishly through the hallways like stagnant water. The air in Ms. Davenport's art class felt thin as if everyone was waiting for the bell to ring. Creative free time, the teacher announced. Draw whatever you like, just stay quiet. Imani sat in the back corner by the window. No one sat near her. On her desk were a stack of blank paper, an HB pencil, and an unopened set of colors. She didn't draw anything specific, just circles, curves, slants, the motion of someone keeping her hands busy to stop her mind from drifting where it shouldn't. She didn't see Chad Walker approaching from behind, didn't hear the scissors, just felt a snip, a soft tug like frayed fabric being sliced, and then a gap behind her neck. Imani lifted her hand, gently, slowly, like someone checking a wound they don't want to find. Her fingers touched air. No hair. She pulled her hand back and found a braid lying loose in her palm, cut clean, thick, warm with her heat. Behind her, Chad laughed loudly. Yo, oh my God, he shouted, holding the braid high like a trophy. Dylan's jaw dropped. Dude, that's messed up. Chad shook the braid, just lightening the load. That stuff's heavy, right? Imani didn't turn around, didn't scream, didn't leap to her feet. She just stared at her hand, at the braid not as a piece of her body lost, but as a symbol, something they thought was weakness but was armor. From across the room, Zachary Miller muttered, Damn, didn't think you'd do it. That's bold. You think she's gonna cry laughter, murmurs, eye rolls, feigned shock followed by more snickers. Cruelty wrapped in the gift paper of just a joke. Chad stepped closer, whispered, Don't take it personally. You're always so serious. Figured you needed a makeover. Imani stood up, not fast, not furious. She set down her pencil, slid her chair back, and stood tall, a soft scrape of wood on tile, echoing enough to freeze the room. She turned, faced Chad. He looked up, still smiling, but his grin faded as he met her gaze. Relax, Chad said quietly, suddenly, unsure. It's not like it was real or anything. Imani stared at him, cold, expressionless. You think that makes it better? Zachary leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. You make it a statement. You wear it like armor. People are gonna test it. Imani locked eyes with him. You think this is about hair? Zachary smirked. Isn't it? She took a step forward. No one moved, no one spoke. Another step, the air compressed. The braid fell from Chad's hand. Ms. Davenport finally looked up. Is something going on? No one answered. Then Imani spoke, not loudly, not angrily, just loudly enough for everyone to hear. You don't get to touch me. You don't get to take something from me and call it a joke. Chad raised his hands as if surrendering. Okay, just calm down. But Imani wasn't angry. She wasn't shaking. She didn't crumble like they expected, didn't run, didn't scream. She calculated. And then a heavy, clean smack shattered the silence like breaking glass. The punch landed before any apology could form. Chad collapsed onto the art table, blood gushing from his nose, staining the pristine white sketch paper. Dylan lunged, but she locked his wrist, twisted it, and slammed his elbow to the wooden table. His grunt spilled out like a child waking from a nightmare. Zachary approached, but not to fight. All right, you made your point, you win. Imani looked at him. No, she said, colder than steel. You don't get to talk. And the whole room fell silent. She bent down, picked up her braid like a discarded crown, then turned and walked out of the class. No one dared stop her. Imani sat in the main office, the hard plastic chair cold against her back. The severed braid, now dried, was wrapped in a napkin in her lap like a sacred relic. No one spoke to her, no one offered water, no one asked if she was okay, but everyone looked. The news had spread down the hallways before the seventh bell rang. Some students whispered, "She snapped." Others just said they cut her hair. That line was so simple that it spread like lightning. Then Principal Jerome Foster appeared. He wasn't hurried, wasn't tense, gave no orders, just opened the door, looked at her and said, "Come on in, Imani." His office was nothing like the rest of the school, no colorful bulletin boards, no slogans of excellence, just a quiet, orderly space that smelled of coffee and old paper. He motioned for her to sit across from his desk. The door closed behind them so softly that it barely made a sound. And for a few moments, they just looked at each other. No lights, no tapping, just presence. Imani sat upright, hand still holding the severed braid. Foster folded his arms. No files, no referral slip, just a man facing a girl who had been humiliated and had fought back. "I read the report," he said slowly, measuring every word. "You attacked 3 students. One's got a broken nose. Another might need x-rays." Imani didn't speak. She looked at the floor, then back up, eyes clear. Not pleading, just certain. Foster tilted his head. Why? Imani took a deep breath. Her voice was hoarse, not from crying, but from exhaustion. "They cut my hair." Foster nodded, not surprised, not condemning. "I figured that's what it was." He let a few seconds pass, not because he needed time, but to give truth space to resonate. "I watched the security feed. You didn't run. You didn't resist. You waited." Imani looked up for the first time, meeting the eyes of an adult without armor. That's not the kind of reaction from someone who just snapped. She didn't answer, just sat still, the braid in her hand, a compact declaration. Foster leaned back, palms flat on the desk, and said, not loudly, but with a weight that silenced the room. "Most people, when they hear a black girl broke a white boy's nose and sent 2 to the nurse, they think violent, threat, unstable." Imani pressed her lips together. "They always do." Foster nodded. "But I don't just ask what happened. I ask what happened before. What got ignored, what got laughed off, what got silenced." Then his voice dropped, eyes dark as deep water. "And I've learned, most people don't want those questions answered." Imani exhaled slowly, then said, "I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to finish the day, go home, breathe. So why didn't you walk away?" She looked up. Her eyes are dry, her voice was steady. "Because I've walked away 100 times, and it only made them laugh louder." She opened her hand, offering the braid, then they took this. Foster looked at what she held as if it were a wound that didn't bleed but cut to the bone. "It wasn't just hair," he said. "No," Imani replied. "It never is." Silence. Then he said, "My grandmother used to braid my cousin's hair every Sunday. She said it was part of her crown. The world would try to rip it off with policies, stares, and silence, but if you wore it with pride, no one could take it without a fight." Imani didn't smile, but her shoulders eased for the first time in days. Then Foster placed a pale yellow envelope on the desk and slid it toward her. 3-day suspension. You'll sign. I'll file it. You'll go home. She nodded, but he didn't stop. They'll want more, he said. They'll push for expulsion, the parents, the board, maybe even the district. Imani bit her lip. They'll say I'm dangerous. Yes, he replied, and I'll say, here's the footage. Here's the context, and I'll ask questions that make people uncomfortable. Imani looked at him. Why? Foster didn't blink. Because I've spent my whole life walking the line between the job they gave me and the job that matters. And today I've decided those two things don't have to be different anymore. Imani nodded slightly, as if she had heard something she'd been waiting for her whole life but never believed would come. "This isn't the end," he said. "You understand me?" "Yes," she replied. Foster leaned forward, eyes locked with hers. "You've been fighting alone since day one." Imani let go of the braid. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. Not anymore. 3 days of suspension weren't a break. Not for Imani Carter. In her small room, she laid out the scraps of paper on the floor, notes tossed onto her desk, messages taped to her locker, texts printed from her phone. All of it was evidence. Not a story, a pattern. She began writing by hand each day. Every detail, every name. No emotion, no judgment, just record. Monday, scheduled 10:17 a.m. Jordan Marks blocked the bathroom door and said, "You sure you're in the right restroom? This ain't the hood." No one else was in the room. I recorded it, but only caught my response, "Move." A thick notebook, hard brown cover, no title but a single word on the first page, "Witness." Imani was no longer just a victim. She had become a recorder of truth, not to complain, but to present. When she returned to school, she didn't say much, but her eyes had changed. When someone whispered or mocked in class, she didn't react. She just quietly pulled out her pen and wrote in the notebook. Once Dylan Bennett glanced over and asked, "What's that, a diary of how sensitive you are?" Imani looked at him for a moment, then smiled, not mocking. "It's a record, in case you forget what you said." At the library, she researched civil rights in education, the right to learn in a harassment-free environment, anti-bullying statutes, and federal policies on racial discrimination in schools. Then she began asking questions, not to teachers, but to other students. She approached the isolated and Asian boy who always sat alone in the cafeteria, a trans student no one dared to speak to, a Mexican girl once mocked for her accent. The only question she asked was, "What do they say to you when no one's watching?" At first they hesitated, but they started to speak when they saw her eyes. No pity, no rush, no savior complex. She asked permission to write it down. No one refused. A week later, Imani's notebook was no longer just hers. It was a ledger for everyone who had been forced into silence. One Friday afternoon after class, she went to Principal Foster's office. No knock, no appointment. He was reviewing files and looked up when he saw her. "Back already?" She nodded and placed the notebook on his desk. Said nothing else. Foster opened it. Minutes passed in silence as he flipped through pages, like reading an unrendered verdict. Then he asked, "This all happened since you got here?" She shook her head. "Most of it happened long before. They just stopped writing it down." "I didn't." Foster leaned back in his chair. "You know what this is, right?" Imani nodded. "It's not revenge. It's a record. It's a pattern." He pressed his lips together. "It's admissible." She nodded again. "I used full names, dates, and quotes." That night, Foster sent an internal email to the school board. The subject line was brief. "Pattern of racial harassment, attached documentation from student witness." No defense, no opinion, just facts complete, cold, and undeniable. And from that moment on, no one could say they didn't know. Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. Once used for budgets, competitions, and sponsor welcomes, the Lincoln High boardroom now holds a very different energy. The banner still read, "Diversity, Excellence, Inclusion." Still in that room, diversity had long been treated as a burden, excellence questioned when it came with darker skin, and inclusion reduced to buzzwords in unread emails. Imani Carter sat in the front row beside Principal Foster. No uniform, no backpack, a plain black button-down, hair tied high, not to hide but to defy. The witness notebook lay on the polished wood table among thick files and glowing laptops. Across from her sat 7 representatives of the school district legal department and parents' council who had assumed this meeting would be a formality. But Foster didn't begin with an apology. He began slowly, "We're not here to reconcile. We're here to present." The first to respond was Ms. Pierce, head of student oversight. "The incident involving Ms. Carter and the other 3 students has greatly concerned parents. We must ensure a safe learning environment for all." Foster nodded and pushed the notebook toward her. "Then please read pages 27 and 29-33, and especially the statements from 3 other students ones never asked because they didn't cause trouble." The air sank. Ms. Pierce opened the notebook, eyes scanning until they landed on a page with bold handwriting and a circled name, Eva Morales. "What do they call you?" Imani asked, voice calm but firm. Eva, sitting in the second row, stood. Her voice trembled, but not her gaze. "Spick. Bina. ESL freak." A man in a grey suit stood abruptly. "Enough. These accusations are unverified." But Foster cut in, raising his voice for the first time. "They're not accusations, they're direct quotes. Documented. And if you find them hard to hear, imagine being called that daily while no one says a word." The room went silent. Not because no one had anything to say, but because no one wanted to be the first to admit what they already knew. After Eva came Malik Thompson, the brown-skinned boy who always looked down when crossing the yard. "They locked me in a locker and taped a sign that said Muslim Bomb Squad on the door." Some board members lowered their heads. Others avoided Imani's eyes. But she didn't look away. Not to intimidate, but to declare, "I'm not here to endure any more. I'm here to remind you everything you've been silent about now has names, dates, and evidence." Ms. Pierce spoke again, her tone quieter. "What do you want from this board, Imani?" She didn't hesitate. Recognition. Acknowledgement. Action. Start by enforcing the racial discrimination clauses. No private settlements, no apology emails, no more silence. After a pause, the legal rep spoke. "We'll need time to review." Foster interrupted. "Time passed last school year, when students' whispers were dismissed for lack of footage or cameras because it wasn't serious enough. Now there is footage, and this student and others like her won't be silent anymore." The room didn't explode. There was no applause. This was just another kind of silence, not from fear, but because denial was no longer possible. In that moment, Imani knew she wasn't just the girl whose hair was cut. She was the one who made them sit down and listen. Monday morning, the campus of Lincoln High was as crowded as usual, but something had changed. No one said it aloud or dared name it, but the glances differed. There were no more mocking looks when Imani Carter walked through the hallway. No more familiar whispers. No more smirks when she entered the classroom with her hair tied high and eyes that didn't flinch. At the central bulletin board, a large A3-sized paper was posted stamped with the official school seal, its title in bold, "New Response Policy for Harassment and Racial Discrimination on Lincoln High Grounds, effective today." Below is a list of new procedures. Students can submit anonymous reports. Every report will be logged, reviewed, and addressed within 72 hours. Harassment will no longer be handled internally, but will be referred to the school district's oversight division, which includes legal representatives and independent monitors. No one said a word, but everyone read it. And for the first time, that bulletin board was no longer a place for club flyers or test results. It symbolized something many students never dared to hope for, a space to speak up. Principal Foster stepped into the hallway, accompanied by a new advisor, Ms. Melissa Barnes, a social activist and licensed therapist who had worked in inner-city schools. Her arrival wasn't announced with fanfare, no trumpets, no press conference. But word spread fast. People called her the woman Imani made the school hire. Inside the new counseling office was just a table and a box of old tissues. A notebook now read, "You can say anything. You will not be punished for telling the truth." Imani looked at it and smiled. Not because everything was fine, but finally there was a door open for others. When a student mocked a Mexican peer's accent in class, the teacher didn't ignore it. He paused the lecture, wrote the slur on the board, and asked the class, "Why do we learn English if not to use it to defend one another?" The students were silent, but it was the silence of realization, not complicity. A month later, the school held a complete parent assembly. For the first time in Lincoln High's history, the keynote speaker wasn't the principal or superintendent. It was a student, Imani Carter. She stepped onto the stage, the spotlight illuminating her face, calm, composed, and steady. She didn't retell the haircut incident, the fight, or the tears. She said, "I'm not here to blame. I'm here to begin again." But starting again doesn't mean forgetting. Starting again means facing the truth and building something better from there. The room went still, not because they hadn't heard such words before, but because for the first time they believed them from someone who had earned the right to speak. After the assembly, a mother approached Imani. It was the boy's mother, who had been locked in the locker. She didn't speak at first. She just hugged her. Then in tears said, "Thank you for not giving up." Imani just smiled and softly replied, "I only did what someone should have done long ago." And from that day, Lincoln High was no longer the same school. It wasn't perfect, but it had begun to listen. That was the difference between a golden cage and a place you could call a school. 2 months after the assembly, Imani Carter's speech, filmed by a parent, was uploaded to social media. Within 24 hours, the 6-minute video had nearly 1 million views. No effects, no dramatic music, just the voice of a teenage girl standing in front of a room full of adults, calm, articulate, and never once apologizing for her presence. People called her the quiet fire, a flame that didn't burn wildly but hot enough to melt the ice of indifference. Imani never wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted to go to school like everyone else. But she accomplished more. She gave a voice to kids who had long stayed silent. Students of color from other states started writing letters to Lincoln High, thanking her for saying what we wished someone would hear. A group of high schoolers in New Jersey asked permission to use the Witness notebook as a model to create their own wall of stories. In Atlanta, a public school began reviewing its entire discrimination reporting policy after one student enclosed a copy of Imani's speech with their complaint letter. Reporters knocked on her door. Documentary filmmakers wanted rights. A national news network called her mother one afternoon, asking if Imani would accept an invitation to a panel on education equity. She declined most offers. She didn't need a stage. She needed a change. And if people truly wanted to listen, they had to read the notebook, not just film her tears. During the closing ceremony on the last Friday of the school year, Imani Carter was called for the Voice of Change Award, which had never existed before. As she stepped onto the stage, Foster handed her the certificate and whispered, "The girl who reminded us that sometimes a student can be the one to teach the system." Imani didn't say much, just one sentence before walking off to the sound of applause echoing through the auditorium. "I didn't make you change. I just made you look at what you pretended not to see." That summer, she spent her days at the local library helping immigrant kids practice their English. She didn't tell them her story. She asked about theirs. She took notes just as she had once done for herself. One afternoon, a Sudanese boy named Omar tugged her sleeve after class. "Miss Imani, if they tease me because I'm dark-skinned, can I borrow that notebook?" Imani smiled gently and handed him a blank one. "No, you'll write your own. And when it's full, you won't need to hand it to anyone. You'll stand up and read it yourself." Imani Carter, 16 years old, had no power title or microphone, but had become a keeper of the fire. Not the fire of rage, but the fire of quiet determination, unshakable and unstoppable. A flame spread from the desk to the boardroom and into the minds of those who once believed silence would protect them. And ever since, whenever someone in the Lincoln High hallway muttered a slur, someone would step forward, place a hand on the shoulder of the one being hurt, and say, "I know that used to be normal, but ever since she spoke up, that's not what we call normal anymore."